Combs, Martin, Keefe D, who was also in that white Cadillac and had secured the gun, gave it to his nephew, and his nephew shot and killed Tupac.
Police just made a chilling discovery at a house Tupac visited days before his death. Hidden evidence, secret meetings, and dangerous truths have been buried for nearly 30 years. The house secrets are finally coming to light. What was Tupac doing there? What did investigators miss back then? The discovery no one wanted. The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon, routine at first. Nothing that raised alarms or suggested anything beyond standard procedure. A property tied to an old investigation needed to be re-examined, paperwork had surfaced, questions had been raised, and protocol demanded that someone go back and take another look. 2 officers were assigned, neither of them particularly interested, neither expecting anything more than dust and empty rooms. The house sat on a quiet street where neighbors kept to themselves and curtains stayed drawn even in daylight. It had changed hands several times over the years, each owner staying only briefly before moving on without explanation. Local records showed complaints, noise disturbances, suspicious activity, but nothing concrete enough to warrant serious attention. The house existed in that strange space between noticed and investigated, seen but never truly examined. When the officers arrived, the air felt different, heavier somehow, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. The front door was unlocked, which should not have been the case, and inside the silence was absolute, not peaceful but oppressive, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. They moved through rooms slowly, flashlights cutting through dim spaces, noting peeling wallpaper, stained floors, furniture left behind like someone had fled in a hurry. Then, one of them found the file. It was buried in a closet beneath old newspapers and discarded clothes. A manila folder with a name scrawled across the front in faded ink. The moment that name registered, everything shifted. This was not just an old house with a troubled history. This was a location line connected to something much larger, much darker, something that had never been properly resolved. The officer radioed for backup, his voice tight with an urgency he could not fully explain. Within the hour, detectives arrived, senior investigators who remembered the case, who had lived through the chaos of 1996 and carried the weight of it ever since. They stood in that dim hallway, staring at the folder, at the name written across it, and knew immediately that this discovery changed everything. This house had been waiting for decades, holding secrets that no one wanted to uncover, because uncovering them meant admitting how much had been missed, how much had been ignored, how much had been deliberately left alone. The discovery was not just disturbing because of what it revealed, but because of what it suggested about everyone who had walked away before. The past was no longer past. It was present, undeniable, and demanding answers no one was prepared to give. The house does not look dangerous from the outside. It looks forgotten, a structure that time has slowly eroded into something barely noticed by the world around it. But stepping inside is different. Crossing that threshold feels like entering a space where something terrible happened and never fully left. The air is stale, thick with years of neglect, and every surface is covered in a layer of grime that seems older than it should be. Detectives move through the rooms carefully, their footsteps echoing against bare walls, their voices instinctively lowered, even though there is no one here to disturb. The layout is simple, a living room that opens into a narrow hallway, a kitchen with cabinets hanging slightly open, bedrooms with doors that do not close properly anymore. Nothing about the architecture should feel threatening, yet everything does. One detective pauses in the hallway, his hand resting on the wall, and admits out loud that something feels wrong here. His partner nods without speaking, both of them sensing it. An oppressive weight that has nothing to do with the physical structure and everything to do with what happened within it. Houses can hold memory. They absorb the energy of the people who inhabit them, the violence they witness, the fear they contain. And this house feels saturated with all of it. The walls are stained, not just with age, but with something darker. Patches of discoloration that could be water damage or could be something else entirely. The floors creak in ways that feel deliberate, like the house is announcing their presence to ghosts that still linger. In the back bedroom, someone has scratched words into the plaster, barely legible now, but still visible if you look closely enough. Messages left behind by people who are no longer around to explain them. Forensic teams begin their work, photographing every corner, collecting samples, documenting everything with the kind of precision that suggests they know. This matters more than a typical cold case review. They find cigarette butts, old bottles, fragments of clothing, pieces of a life that was lived here in secret, away from cameras and public scrutiny. Every item tells a small part of a larger story, but the story itself remains frustratingly incomplete. The lead detective stands in the center of the living room and looks around slowly, taking in the decay, the darkness, the sense of something unfinished lingering in the air. This is not just a location, he says quietly to his team. This is a witness. The house saw things that people refuse to talk about. It holds evidence that was never properly collected, and it has been sitting here for nearly 3 decades waiting for someone to finally pay attention. But now that they are here, now that they are looking, the question becomes whether they are ready for what the house is about to reveal. Moment. Tupac's name is spoken. The confirmation comes from a senior detective who has been silent since entering the house, his face unreadable as he examines documents spread across a dusty table. He picks up a visitor log, one that should have been entered into evidence decades ago, but somehow never was, and his finger traces down a list of names until it stops on one entry that makes the room go still. Tupac Shakur. He speaks the name out loud, and the effect is immediate. Every officer in the room turns toward him. Conversations stop mid-sentence. The air itself seems to tighten. The date written next to the name is September 4th, 1996, just 3 days before the shooting in Las Vegas. 3 days before everything changed. 3 days that no one had properly accounted for in all the years since. One of the younger detectives asks if they are certain, if the name could be a mistake or a coincidence. Someone else with the same name, perhaps. The senior detective shakes his head slowly, pointing to additional details in the law's arrival time, duration of visit, initials of whoever recorded the entry. This is not speculation, this is documentation. Proof that Tupac was inside this house during a window of time that was supposed to be thoroughly investigated, but clearly was not. The implications settle over the room like a weight no one wants to carry. If Tupac was here, then this location is directly connected to the final days of his life, to decisions that were made, conversations that happened, plans that may have been set in motion. The house is no longer just a piece of forgotten real estate. It is a critical piece of a puzzle that was abandoned before anyone bothered to see the full picture. Questions begin flying immediately. Who else was here that day? What was the purpose of the visit? Why was this information never followed up on? Why does this log exist at all if the house was never properly searched? The answers are not in the room. They exist somewhere in the gap between what was known and what was ignored, between evidence collected and evidence buried. The senior detective sets the log down carefully, like it is something fragile that might disintegrate if handled too roughly. He looks around at the decaying walls, the stained floors, the oppressive silence that hangs over everything, and admits what they are all thinking. The past is not as far away as they believed. It is right here, surrounding them, demanding attention that it was denied for nearly 3 decades. Tupac's name has been spoken in 1,000 places since his death, in songs and documentaries and courtrooms and conspiracy theories. But hearing it here, in this forgotten house, feels different. It feels dangerous, like they have just opened a door that powerful people spent years keeping closed, and now there is no way to shut it again. Retracing his final moves. The investigation shifts immediately. Detectives begin pulling records that should have been pulled in 1996, cross-referencing dates and locations, building a timeline of Tupac's movements in the days leading up to Las Vegas. What they find is unsettling, a pattern of activity that suggests he was moving between places quietly, meeting people in private, staying off the radar in ways that now seem deliberate. The house they are standing in was one stop among several, but it was a significant one. The visitor log indicates he was here for nearly 3 hours, far longer than a casual visit, long enough for serious conversations, for plans to be discussed, for alliances or conflicts to take shape. Detectives start making calls, reaching out to anyone still alive who might remember that time, who might have been connected to this location, who might know why Tupac came here, and what happened during those hours. Most calls go unanswered, some numbers are disconnected, others ring endlessly into voicemail boxes that have not been checked in years. The few people who do answer claim they do not remember, do not know anything, were not involved, their voices tight with the kind of defensiveness that suggests they remember perfectly well, but have no intention of saying so. One former associate, speaking on condition of anonymity, admits that Tupac was meeting with people he should not have trusted. people who had their own agendas, people who saw him as an asset to be used or a problem to be eliminated. The associate refuses to name names, refuses to provide details, but confirms what the detectives are beginning to suspect. The final days of Tupac's life were not random. They were orchestrated, a series of moves and counter-moves that led inevitably toward violence. The timeline becomes clearer with each piece of information. Tupac in Los Angeles, then at this house, then traveling to Las Vegas for the Tyson fight, each location connected by invisible threads of intention and consequence. Detectives map it out on a board, drawing lines between places and people, watching a picture emerge that should have been visible decades ago, but was ignored or actively obscured. What becomes undeniable is that danger was already following Tupac long before he arrived in Las Vegas. The confrontation at the MGM Grand was not the beginning. It was simply the moment when tensions that had been building finally erupted into the open. This house, this forgotten location with its stained walls and oppressive silence, was part of that buildup. A place where decisions were made that would lead directly to a car stopped at a red light and bullets tearing through the night. The detectives stand in the dim living room, staring at their notes, realizing that they are not just investigating a cold case. They are uncovering a trail that people with power worked very hard to erase. And that trail leads somewhere nobody wanted to look. What was hidden? Inside, the forensic team makes the discovery in the late afternoon, tucked behind a loose panel in the back bedroom, a space so carefully concealed that it would have been missed in any cursory search. Inside the hidden compartment are items that do not belong in an abandoned house, items that suggest preparation, intention, and knowledge of violence before it happened. There are photographs, grainy and faded, but still clear enough to identify faces. People standing together in this very house, some of them known associates of Tupac, others connected to rival factions. All of them in the same room at the same time, which should not have been possible given the tensions that existed publicly. The images suggest secret meetings, negotiations that were happening behind closed doors, while the media reported open warfare. There are handwritten notes, fragments of conversations that reference dates and locations, coded language that forensic analysts will need time to fully decode, but that clearly indicate planning of some kind. One note mentions Las Vegas, another references the Tyson fight. A third contains initials that match known gang members who were in Nevada on the night of the shooting. The connections are not definitive yet, but they are disturbing. They suggest coordination, where everyone claimed there was only chaos. Most unsettling of all is a firearm, hidden in the same compartment. A weapon that ballistics will need to test, but that raises immediate questions about why it was left behind, why it was hidden so carefully, and whether it connects to any of the violence that followed. The detective who finds it does not touch it immediately. He calls for the evidence team, photographs it in place, follows protocol precisely because he knows how critical this could become. The lead detective stands over the compartment, staring down at the collection of items that should have been found 29 years ago, that would have changed the entire trajectory of the investigation if anyone had bothered to look properly. He feels anger rising, not just at the criminals who used this house, but at the system that failed to search it thoroughly, at the investigators who took the easy path, at everyone who decided that solving Tupac's case was less important than avoiding the complications it would create. Evidence bags are filled, labels are written, chain of custody is documented with obsessive care. Everyone in the room understands that what they have found is explosive, that it suggests premeditation and conspiracy, that it points toward answers that powerful people have spent decades keeping buried. The house is no longer just a witness. It is a vault, and the door has finally been opened to reveal secrets that were meant to stay hidden forever. The people who vanished. The names attached to the house begin emerging from old records, property deeds, utility bills, witness statements that were filed and then apparently forgotten. Detectives compile a list of everyone known to have been connected to the location in the months leading up to September 1996. And the list is longer than anyone expected, a web of people whose lives intersected briefly in this space before scattering in different directions. The first person they try to locate is the registered owner from that time. A man whose name appears on documents but whose face remains elusive. Public records show he left California in early 1997, moved to another state, then vanished completely from any traceable database. No death certificate, no forwarding address, no social media presence, nothing that would indicate where he went or whether he is still alive. Others on the list follow similar patterns: abrupt relocations, name changes, complete withdrawals from public life. One woman who was listed as a frequent visitor to the house appears in records until 1998, then simply stops existing on paper, her last known address abandoned, her family claiming they have not heard from her in decades and do not want to discuss why. A former associate who agreed to speak briefly on the phone describes an atmosphere of fear that descended after Tupac's death. People disappeared not because they wanted to, but because they were told to, because staying visible meant becoming a target, because knowing too much had become a liability no one could afford. He hangs up before providing names, his final words a warning that some questions are still dangerous to answer. Detectives attempt to track down gang members who were connected to the house, individuals whose criminal records should make them easy to locate. But even these men have gone to ground in ways that seem coordinated. Parole officers report lost contact. Last known associates claim ignorance, and the few who are found refuse to speak without lawyers present, then refuse to speak even with legal representation. The pattern becomes undeniable. Everyone connected to this house either disappeared, changed their identity, or built walls of silence so thick that no investigation can penetrate them. It is not the natural drift of time causing people to lose touch. It is deliberate erasure, a collective decision to vanish rather than face questions about what happened inside those walls. Silence becomes its own kind of confession, the detective says quietly, staring at the list of missing persons. When this many people go to this much effort to hide, it means they all know something worth hiding, and whatever that something is, it died with Tupac on September 13th, or so they hoped. A theory that feels too real. Late one night in the precinct, the lead detective sits alone with the evidence spread across his desk. Photographs from the house, the visitor log with Tupac's name, ballistics reports on the weapon they found, witness statements that say everything and nothing at the same time. He has been a detective for 32 years, has worked hundreds of cases, knows how to separate speculation from fact, but what he sees in front of him now is forming a picture that feels too disturbing to ignore. The theory begins to take shape slowly, piece by piece, connection by connection. Tupac came to this house 3 days before Las Vegas. That much is documented. And during those 3 hours he was there, he met with people from multiple factions. People who should have been enemies, but were apparently negotiating something in private. The photographs suggest meetings that were kept secret from the public, alliances or allies that contradicted the narrative of open warfare between East and West. What if, the detective thinks, what if the shooting was not spontaneous retaliation for the MGM Grand fight? What if it was the end result of something planned inside this house, discussed, agreed upon, set into motion days before Tupac ever arrived in Las Vegas? What if the confrontation at the casino was not the cause, but the excuse? The public justification for violence that had already been decided. The weapon found in the house has not been conclusively linked to the shooting yet. Ballistics are still running tests, but its presence raises questions that cannot be ignored. Why was it hidden so carefully? Why was it left behind? And who was it meant for if not used in the crime everyone remembers? The detective makes notes, draws diagrams, connects timelines, and the more he works, the more convinced he becomes that Tupac's case was not the chaotic gang violence it was sold as, but something more calculated, more deliberate. He thinks about the failures of the original investigation, the leads ignored, the witnesses not interviewed, this house never properly searched, and wonders how much of that was incompetence and how much was intention. If this theory is correct, if the violence was planned in advance, then people knew. People had information that could have prevented it, and those people either stayed silent or were silenced. The detective sits back in his chair, exhausted and disturbed by what he has pieced together. It is just a theory for now, he reminds himself, but it feels too real, fits the evidence too perfectly, explains too many inconsistencies to dismiss. Tupac's death was not sudden. It was the conclusion of a chain that started inside this forgotten house. And everyone involved has spent nearly 3 decades making sure no one traced it back. Resistance from within. The investigation begins meeting obstacles almost immediately after the theory becomes formalized, shared with superiors, entered into official reports. The lead detective submits a request for additional resources, more personnel to track down the missing witnesses, forensic experts to analyze the evidence from the house, authorization to expand the scope beyond what was originally approved. The request is denied without explanation. He pushes back, argues that they have uncovered significant new evidence in a high-profile unsolved case, that public interest alone justifies deeper investigation. His supervisor listens politely, nods in appropriate places, then repeats that resources are limited. Priorities have been set elsewhere, and this case, despite its notoriety, cannot consume the department's attention indefinitely. The conversation ends with a suggestion that the detective focus on what can be conclusively proven, rather than pursuing theories that might lead nowhere. Files begin disappearing, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, quietly. A witness statement that was digitized last week is suddenly unavailable in the system. A forensic report gets misfiled. The visitor log with Tupac's name is requested by another department and does not come back when promised. Each incident alone could be coincidence, clerical error, the normal chaos of a busy precinct, but together they form a pattern that feels deliberate. Other detectives start avoiding him. Conversations stop when he enters rooms. Invitations to collaborate on related cases dry up. One colleague pulls him aside and warns him quietly that he is making people uncomfortable, that pushing too hard on this particular case is not good for his career, that some investigations are better left in the past where they belong. The warning is delivered with apparent concern, but the message underneath is clear: back off. Phone calls come from outside the department, polite but firm inquiries about the status of the investigation, reminders that any public statements must be cleared through official channels, suggestions that sensitivity is required given the cultural significance of the case. The detective recognizes the language of pressure being applied from above, forces beyond the police department expressing interest in controlling the narrative. He sits in his office late one night, alone again, staring at the evidence he has managed to keep close, wondering how much longer he will be allowed to pursue this before the resistance becomes impossible to overcome. The truth is within reach, he can feel it, but reaching for it means fighting a system that has already decided the truth is too expensive, too complicated, too dangerous to fully expose. The mistakes that can't be explained. The detective begins reviewing the original case files from 1996 with fresh eyes, reading through reports he has seen before but never questioned, looking for the seams where the investigation should have gone one direction but inexplicably went another. What he finds is more disturbing than he anticipated. A trail of decisions that made no sense then and make even less sense now. The house should have been searched within days of the shooting, standard procedure for any location connected to a victim's final movements. The visitor log with Tupac's name was in the initial batch of evidence collected. Detectives knew he had been there, yet no follow-up search was ever conducted. The report simply states that the location was deemed not relevant to the investigation. No explanation given, no justification provided. Witnesses who mentioned the house in their statements were never interviewed a second time, their information filed away without being pursued. One witness specifically told investigators that Tupac had seemed anxious after leaving the location, that he mentioned feeling like something was wrong. This statement should have been a red flag demanding immediate action. Instead, it was noted and ignored. The detective finds interview notes with names crossed out, whole sections redacted in ways that make the remaining information useless. Evidence logs with items listed but never actually collected or tested. One entry describes a box of documents seized from the house, but there is no record of what happened to that box, no inventory of its contents. He discovers that certain leads were actively closed, rather than allowed to go cold naturally, marked as unproductive and removed from the active investigation, sometimes within hours of being reported. One detective's notes indicate he wanted to pursue the house connection further, but his request was denied by a supervising officer whose name appears repeatedly throughout the file. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental. The detective sits with the files spread around him, seeing clearly now what he suspected. The original investigation was steered away from the house deliberately, by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The house that still keeps its secret months pass, the investigation grinds forward slowly against resistance that never becomes overt but never disappears. The detective and his small team gather what evidence they can, interview the few witnesses willing to talk, build a case that feels substantial, but remains frustratingly incomplete. They know more than they did when they first entered the house, but they still do not know enough. The house itself sits unchanged through all of it, still empty, still oppressive, still holding something back that refuses to be extracted through forensic analysis or careful documentation. The detective returns there sometimes, standing alone in rooms that feel colder each time, as if the building itself resents being disturbed after so many years of silence. New evidence trickles in occasionally, a former gang member willing to confirm certain details without providing names, a retired officer admitting off the record that he was told to stay away from specific leads, a journalist who covered the case in '96, sharing notes that were never published because sources disappeared before stories could be verified. Each piece adds to the picture, but the picture never quite becomes complete. The ballistics report on the weapon found in the house comes back inconclusive. It was fired at some point, but cannot be definitively linked to the Las Vegas shooting. The degradation from years of storage making certain tests impossible. The photographs are authenticated as genuine, but provide no smoking gun, just proof that people were meeting who claim they never met, which is suggestive but not prosecutable. The detective writes his final report knowing it will not lead to arrests, will not solve the case in any official sense, will likely be filed away and forgotten, just like the evidence before it. He writes it anyway, documenting everything they found, every connection they made, every door that was deliberately left closed in the original investigation. In the conclusion, he states plainly what he believes, that Tupac Shakur's case was not random gang violence, but a planned execution, that the house they discovered was central to that plan, that people knew what was going to happen and allowed it to happen, and that the investigation was sabotaged from within to protect those people. The report is submitted, acknowledged, and quietly archived, leaving one haunting thought hanging in the air. Some secrets are protected, not because they are small, but because they are too big, and the house on that quiet street will keep its silence until someone with real power decides the truth matters more than the lie.